For millions of Americans, the dream of owning a home is starting to feel impossible. Prices continue rising, rent keeps climbing, mortgage payments are becoming overwhelming. And in many cities, even middle-class families struggle to afford basic housing. What was once considered a temporary market problem is now becoming something much larger. America's housing crisis could get worse. Much worse. And the reasons go far beyond expensive cities like New York or San Francisco. Housing pressure is spreading across suburbs, smaller cities, and even rural areas that were once considered affordable. The problem is no longer local, it is national. So why is this happening? Why has housing become so difficult for so many Americans? And why do experts believe the crisis may continue for years or even decades? The answer begins with one simple reality. America does not have enough homes. For years, the United States has built fewer homes than needed to keep up with population growth and household formation. After the 2008 financial crisis, home construction slowed dramatically. Builders became cautious, lending tightened, development decreased. And even when the economy recovered, housing supply never fully caught up. This created a long-term shortage that quietly built over more than a decade. At first, the effects were gradual, then demand exploded. Population growth, low interest rates, migration trends, and remote work all collided at the same time, creating massive pressure on the housing market. Suddenly, millions of Americans were competing for too few homes. And when demand rises faster than supply, prices surge. That is exactly what happened. But the housing crisis is not just about home prices. Rent is also becoming unaffordable. In many cities, rent now consumes a huge percentage of monthly income, especially for younger Americans. For some workers, housing costs alone make saving for a future nearly impossible. This creates a dangerous cycle. People cannot afford homes because rent is too high, and rent stays high because people cannot afford homes. Meanwhile, new housing construction often fails to keep pace with demand. One major reason is zoning laws. Many American cities were designed around low-density suburban development. Large portions of residential land are restricted to single-family homes, limiting the construction of apartments, duplexes, or higher-density housing. This restricts supply in areas where demand is strongest. Even when developers want to build more housing, regulations, permit delays, local opposition, and infrastructure limits can slow or block projects entirely. This is often called the "not in my backyard" problem. People support more housing in theory, but often oppose new developments near their own neighborhoods. As a result, supply shortages continue. Construction costs are another major issue. Building homes today is far more expensive than it was decades ago. Land prices have increased. Labor shortages have pushed wages higher. Materials like lumber, steel, and concrete became more expensive. Regulations and permitting costs also add significant expenses to development. All of this makes it harder to build affordable homes profitably. Developers often focus instead on higher-end housing because the financial returns are stronger. That means fewer entry-level homes are being built for middle-class buyers. Another factor making the crisis worse is investor activity. Large institutional investors, private equity firms, and corporate landlords increasingly purchase single-family homes as investment assets. In some markets, these companies compete directly with ordinary families for housing inventory. This can drive prices even higher. Housing is increasingly treated not just as shelter, but as a financial asset. And that changes the market fundamentally. For investors, rising prices are profitable. For families, rising prices can be devastating. Remote work also intensified housing pressure in unexpected ways. When millions of Americans gained flexibility to work from anywhere, migration patterns shifted rapidly. Workers moved from expensive coastal cities into suburbs, smaller metros, and Sunbelt states. Places that were once relatively affordable suddenly experienced surging demand. Cities like Austin, Nashville, Tampa, Phoenix, and Boise saw rapid price increases as newcomers arrived with higher salaries from larger markets. This spread the housing crisis into regions that previously escaped extreme affordability problems. Interest rates have added another layer of difficulty. When mortgage rates were historically low, buyers rushed into the market, increasing competition and pushing prices upward. Later, when interest rates rose sharply, monthly mortgage payments became dramatically more expensive, even if home prices stabilized somewhat. This created a painful situation. Many people can no longer afford homes at current prices and rates. At the same time, existing homeowners with low mortgage rates are reluctant to sell because moving would mean giving up favorable financing. This reduces inventory even further. Fewer homes for sale means continued upward pressure on prices. Another major issue is wages. In many parts of America, housing costs have risen much faster than incomes. A generation ago, a middle-class salary could often support homeownership relatively comfortably. Today, many workers feel locked out of the market entirely. Younger generations are especially affected. Millennials and Gen Z face higher housing costs relative to income than many previous generations did at the same age. This delays major life milestones: marriage, starting families, having children, building long-term wealth. Homeownership has historically been one of the primary ways Americans build financial stability. When fewer people can access it, inequality grows over time. And inequality is becoming deeply connected to housing. People who already own homes often benefit from rising property values. Those who do not own homes fall further behind as prices continue increasing. This creates a widening gap between homeowners and renters. Climate change may also worsen the housing crisis in ways many people underestimate. Some regions face rising insurance costs due to hurricanes, wildfires, flooding, and extreme weather risks. In states like Florida and California, insurance premiums have already increased dramatically in some areas. If climate risks continue intensifying, housing affordability could worsen further as ownership costs rise. Certain regions may even become less desirable or harder to insure altogether. Infrastructure and population growth also create pressure. America's fastest-growing cities often struggle to expand roads, utilities, schools, and transportation systems quickly enough to support rapid development. When infrastructure lags behind population growth, housing supply becomes constrained even further. At the same time, immigration and domestic migration continue increasing housing demand nationwide. And this demand is unlikely to disappear. Another overlooked issue is smaller household sizes. More Americans now live alone or in smaller family units compared to previous generations. This means more housing units are needed even if population growth slows. A country with more single-person households requires significantly more homes than a country where larger families share living space. Technology and short-term rental platforms have also changed housing markets. In some cities, homes that once housed long-term residents are now used as vacation rentals or investment properties. This reduces available housing supply for local populations. And in high-demand tourist areas, it can dramatically affect affordability. But perhaps the biggest reason the crisis could worsen is simple. Housing problems take years to solve. Even if policies change tomorrow, building enough homes to close America's supply gap could take a decade or longer. Construction is slow, infrastructure takes time. Zoning reform faces political resistance, and demand continues growing faster than solutions are implemented. This means the market may remain strained for a very long time. So what could happen next? One possibility is continued migration away from the most expensive regions toward more affordable states and smaller cities. Another possibility is rising generational inequality, where homeownership becomes increasingly concentrated among older Americans and wealthier households. We may also see more multi-generational living arrangements as families combine resources to afford housing. And perhaps most importantly, America may begin redefining what the American dream actually looks like. For decades, home ownership symbolized stability, independence, and upward mobility. But for many younger Americans today, that dream feels increasingly distant. That emotional shift could reshape American society itself. Still, there are potential solutions. Cities can reform zoning laws. Governments can encourage higher density housing. Infrastructure investment can support expansion. New construction technologies may reduce costs over time. And some regions still have room to build affordably if managed correctly. But solving the housing crisis requires political will, long-term planning, and massive investment. And those are not easy things to coordinate. Because housing is not just about buildings. It affects family formation, economic mobility, labor markets, mental health, migration, and inequality. It shapes nearly every aspect of modern life.